Good day, everyone. I am Ruben Leiba, presently affiliated at Bulihan Integrated Senior High School Department, Bulihan, Rosario, Batangas. For today, we will discuss the challenges for educational policy and planning. From our previous discussion, it has become clear that the large number of countries are still far from having the education for all goals. Government aiming to shape attainable, competitive, and qualitative progress of their educational system. At the end of the lesson, we will be able to understand and identify the main issues for present education development. Discuss the main challenges arising in the context for educational policy and planning. Understand the present educational system arising from the challenges that are emerging for educational policy and planning. The fourth challenge is linking learning and work, qualification structures, and career guidance. In both the developed and the developing world, the need to engage in learning through the life cycle, through formal and informal settings, is currently widely recognized. The lifelong learning concept sees educational needs of citizens as spanning the whole life cycle, from early childhood to late in adult life, that is, from birth to death or from cradle to grave. Educational needs differ in different phases of life. Hence, learning provision needs to meet demand arising from several sources: economic, social, and personal developmental requirements. Thus, the framework includes all forms of learning activities taking place in both the formal settings of the schools and universities and the informal settings of home, employment, and life situations. One example of the learning that takes place in the informal economy is the traditional apprenticeships that exist in many developing countries. The qualification structures of a country, however, are mostly based on the qualifications earned in the formal sector. Accepting that learning takes place in the informal economy and recognizing it in the qualification system of a country is often a major policy challenge. Another policy challenge is to ensure that a qualification is not a dead end. It needs to provide incentives for the individual to progress, from lower level qualifications to higher levels, and to continue learning both formally and informally. To achieve this, qualifications in a country need to be linked through a progression path. There need to be minimum requirements for entry into a system and ways of achieving these minimum requirements. Qualifications must have clear links with multiple entry routes to other qualifications. Career counseling services can then help individuals to navigate through the qualification pathways and allow for accumulation of learning. It is clear that the notion of a qualification system is meaningful only across different subsectors of education. It is a feature of the system as a whole. A major challenge of TVE is the low status it has in most countries. It is often seen as a second choice and an option for weaker students, frequently linked to their weaker socioeconomic backgrounds. The low status of these programs is linked to the poor status, wages, and working conditions of the jobs for which they prepare people. Another difficulty, especially in developing countries, is the low quality of the TVE programs. Here in our country, the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority is the government agency tasked to manage and supervise technical education and skills development in the Philippines. It was created by virtue of Republic Act 7796, otherwise known as the Technical Education and Skills Development Act of 1994. At the tertiary level, many of the TVE programs suffer from poor quality and increase in academic content. These issues are felt even more strongly in the developing world. The tertiary sector is not well integrated with the needs of learners, the economy, and society. The teaching and learning programs are often highly theoretical in content and neglect the relevance to contemporary society. The low priority given to TVE programs is one manifestation of this problem. The research and development function likewise is unrelated to the needs of industry, especially of small and medium-sized enterprises. The agricultural and resource sectors, which still dominate the economy of many developing nations, are not well reflected in academic and research programs. In some countries, universities continue to producing generalists that look for employment in the government sector or in developed countries. Training of medical doctors is a case in point which represents a serious drain of resources in developing nations. The fifth challenge is resources for education. Each country must decide on how much to spend on education compared with other national priorities, such as health and national defense. Within the education sector itself, there is a need to decide how much to allocate to what kinds of education and training. A lifelong learning perspective has the advantage of engaging across subsectors in terms of allocation issues. Countries differ widely in their priorities, which is partly linked to their level of development, but also to the demographic and educational profile and the nature of the employment market. A sector-wide view is essential to understanding the priority a country accords to education. Table 3 gives information on public expenditure on education for different categories of countries. In general, the middle-income countries spend much lower proportion of their gross domestic product on education compared to high-income countries. Similar data by geographical regions in Table 4 show that the percentage of GNP devoted to education in Southwest Asia, 3.2%, Arab states 4.5%, and Sub-Saharan Africa 5% is below the rate of North America and Western Europe 5.7%. When allocations out of the national budgets are considered, developing regions spend a larger percentage of government budgets, ranging from 14% to 26% as compared with North America and Western Europe 13%. This is to be expected. Developing nations need to spend much more in terms of budget proportion to meet basic education needs because they have a low base of education provision and have to invest more to meet their development goals. They are also facing increasing demand from a population that is growing much faster, with a larger share of children and youth than in developed countries. In addition to total expenditure on education, countries must also decide on how much to allocate to different subsectors within the education sector. Again, countries differ widely in the respective priorities they accord to component of the education sector, such as early childhood education and care, primary schooling, secondary schooling, tertiary education, and adult learning. The sixth challenge is the governance and management. Many of the contextual developments discussed above have changed the understanding of the respective roles of governments and the private sector in the education field. On the one hand, the large economic and social benefits of education argue for a greater role of the state in funding the education and training system. Although the role of state in providing school-level education has always been widely recognized, there are new arguments for governments to support early childhood education as well as literacy and training programs for adults. Empirical evidence also shows that there are large benefits of education for individuals and employers. Hence, a partnership between the state, employers, and individuals is required for funding education and training. As a reflection of the latter point, increased privatization of educational services is one trend that has been observed internationally. The main reason for this is the recognition that education can be a profitable business for which there is a market, and individuals and businesses are willing to pay for quality services. There is increased private provision of education at all levels in most countries. However, the increasing expansion of the private sector raises equity issues. The state has to provide for the majority of the population. Restrictions on government budgets, which are faced by all countries, mean that the expansion of government resources devoted to education has been limited. Even though the proportion of GDP devoted to education has increased in nearly all countries. The per student expenditure in the public sector is generally less than the per student expenditure by the private sector. Furthermore, governments are facing increasing pressures to achieve greater efficiency on the use of public sector funds. One response to these is to decentralize public education services, which is a common trend observed in many countries. Decentralization is also linked to objectives of achieving greater accountability on the part of the state in spending public funds. There is also a trend towards the measurement of student achievements and other educational outcomes, as well as evaluations of education service delivery, as means for the public sector to assess the quality and effectiveness of what is actually being achieved from its expenditures on education.
You.